Hello, my name's Tamika, and you're listening to A Walk in the Park with Animal Friends. So we're here with Lauren today from Cornwall Wildlife Trust at the beautiful Helmentor Nature Reserve, which is absolutely stunning. If you're watching, you can see some of it behind us. So Lauren, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, kind of what got you so interested in beavers and what brought you to the Cornwall Wildlife Trust.
Yeah, so I grew up in Cornwall, so I always wanted to be able to come back here after I went off for university and have a job that was based in Cornwall and be part of a project that was actually looking after nature in Cornwall. And it was actually just a visit to one of the beaver enclosures that we have up in Devon that really promoted and my understanding of what beavers do, and I thought that they're just amazing, so I started to learn in my own time a bit about that. And then the role as Beaver Officer came up at Cornwall Wildlife Trust, and I thought it just sounded amazing, so I wanted to get involved.
I love that title, Beaver Officer. I think that's so cool. So
there are actually a few of us around.
Are there?
Yeah, so different wildlife trusts have beaver officers as well.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, so not my own.
That's really cool. And today, obviously, a little spoiler, we've talked about beavers. We are going to be focusing primarily on beavers in today's episode. But tell me firstly a little bit more about Cornwall Wildlife Trust. What is it that you guys do around here?
Yeah, so Cornwall Wildlife Trust, so we're a charity based in Cornwall, and we're all about preserving nature and restoring nature as well. So we've got a terrestrial conservation team, so we work a lot on land and we focus around engaging with farmers across Cornwall as well. And we also have a marine team because if you've seen Cornwall over the last few days, there's loads of coastline. We've got an amazing marine team, one of the biggest for the wildlife trusts I think in the country. And so it's both marine and land based.
And you're doing a little bit of work with the Cornwall Beaver Project in helping to re-establish beavers back into the UK. So are they naturally native in the UK? Yeah,
so beavers are native to the UK. So there's two types of beaver. You've got the American beaver and the Eurasian beaver. So what we have here in the UK is the Eurasian beaver. And we had them, and they actually went extinct in the UK about 400 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they were hunted and they were persecuted for kind of a few different reasons. One was because of their fur. They've got a really thick fur, and they've got a leathery tail. And then they also, it was for their meat. And also they have this gland which is called castoreum, which was used for various different medicinal purposes. So they were hunted to extinction about 400 years ago. And since then, more recently, I'd say over the past decade or so, people have realised the importance of having them back in the landscape. So Cornwall Wildlife Trust, as part of our work, has been focused on bringing them back.
Amazing. And where then, if you were to spot a beaver in the wild, I know that we probably don't have many that aren't in enclosures at the minute, but if you did have one in the wild, where would you most likely spot one?
Yeah, so in the UK, in Scotland, you're legally allowed to reintroduce beavers into the wild with the correct licence. So the government has allowed that. In the UK, we still don't, the government can't allow wild releases yet, so we're hoping to hear soon. But there are wild populations which have established in different areas in the UK. So, and kind of source unknown. But the one in Devon, up in Devon, there's something that happened called the River Otter Beaver Trial. So in East Devon, beavers were spotted about 10 to 15 years ago on the river. And then the government, at the time, it wasn't illegal to release beavers, so they asked for them to be captured. But actually instead what happened was they underwent a 5-year study to look at the impacts. And they looked at the impacts for society, for nature. Huge study, and it came out overwhelmingly positive. So that population was actually allowed to stay and is actually thriving. So you can go and see them up in East Devon.
That's cool.
we have heard about other populations popping up around the UK as well.
Wow, and you said there about they looked into some research as to what the benefits were of having that population in Devon. So what are the benefits of beavers to nature, to the ecosystems in the UK? Yeah,
so beavers, they're amazing for nature, and it's proven that they have a net positive impact for biodiversity. So they are what we call a keystone species. So for wildlife, they're just really important. They're a real important piece of the puzzle, and they create habitat for various other animals and for different species. So the main way they do this is through their building of dams. So very kind of a key feature of beavers is their ability to build dams and to engineer dams and manipulate the water. So they're semi-aquatic, so they like to be in water. They like a depth of water. So to do this, they live on a river, and they want to keep a depth. So when they don't have that, they actually build their dams, and this has loads of benefits for wildlife. So it really slows the flow of water, and it builds up, and it collects and creates beaver pools and beaver wetlands. And in this, it stores lots of sediment, and that's really good for insects and invertebrates, which is really good for basically the rest of the food chain. So it's good for bats, it's good for birds. But not only that, mammals, they use the dams to cross. They, can feed in the pools. So they really are key for wildlife in general.
So if we weren't to see a successful re-establishment of beavers in the UK, could that lead then to the endangerment and maybe extinction of all those other animals, and then potentially maybe more flooding within the UK?
Yeah, so we know that nature in Cornwall, so there's a state of nature report, and we know that unfortunately a lot of nature is in decline. So it really does depend on taking some bold action, and that could include bringing back beavers, could really support that. But you also mentioned about flooding. So, the wildlife benefits are just one element of what beavers are good for. There's so many other things. So because they build the dams and hold water, they can really alleviate downstream flood risk. So they slow the flow, and they hold more water in the upper bits of the catchment, which means down near the oceans, further downstream, there's less water during high peaks of rain. So during, if you have loads of rain, that water is going to get there a lot slower, so the flood risk is reduced. And we've seen that in Cornwall as well, around our Cornwall Beaver project enclosure. That was one of the motivators for that enclosed project.
Amazing, and we're going to talk about that in just a little minute as well. But firstly, let's talk about the Cornwall Beaver project itself. How did that come to be? What was the driving force behind establishing that project?
Yeah, so the Cornwall Beaver project was established back in 2017.
Okay.
And it's on a privately owned farm, the farmer, the Joneses. So we've got Chris Jones owns that. And he was really concerned about the downstream flooding, actually. So in the village, they live upstream of a small village in Cornwall called Laddock. And there was regular flooding, and he was looking into options that were cost effective and could benefit nature as well. And they came across beavers as a potential solution. So they actually, because you can't do a wild release, you can put beavers into an enclosed space. So they have very big spaces. This is a 5-acre space. There's loads of vegetation. And the beavers, as soon as they moved in, start to build dams and actually hold back more water. And that's actually had a very positive impact on the downstream flooding.
And so then tell me about the introduction of the beavers within, that's Woodland Valley Farm that you mentioned.
So it's called Woodland Valley Farm, yeah. So that's where the enclosure is.
So did Chris reach out to Cornwall Wildlife Trust to help, or was it vice versa? How did that come to
exactly. So Chris owns the land and the enclosure, and Cornwall Wildlife Trust have helped to support the project. And we also do guided walks to help the public engage and to learn about beavers. Part of what Cornwall Wildlife Trust do is they want to really engage with the public and to get more people out into nature as well. So it's beavers are an amazing tool for that. So it's really nice for people to be able to go, because they're really adorable.
They are.
And just to be able to see their dams, to see what they can do as well.
And we were really fortunate to be able to tag along onto one of those walks last night, and we got to see the dams that have been built over time there, and some of them are so big that they're starting to have trees grow out of them, which is really, really helping to reinforce the structure of those dams. And I think it's insane just what they can do, how they twine it in. I can't even fathom the work that goes into it from these little beaver hands.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing.
It's insane.
Yeah, and I think those those beaver walks that we do there, if you go there in the evenings, if you go, you might get a chance to see a beaver, but you can definitely see the dams, and you can see the lodge, and you can see what they're able to create, and also the abundance of wildlife at that site.
Exactly.
Because we know from that site, there's been studies, we know that all invertebrate numbers are up, bird numbers are up, bat numbers are up.
Yeah.
We know, the presence of new mammals. So having the beavers there has brought more wildlife.
Yeah, and you mentioned about beavers helping to re-establish more wildlife anyway, and like you say, that site is definitely somewhere where it's evident of that. The fact that the amount of birds you can hear, we saw a barn owl flying by last night. There's water voles now on the site as well, isn't there? The fish jumping around, it's just amazing. But in that site, did you have to do any work to help them be re-established in there, or was it just a case of there's a body of water and they'll be able to work from there?
Pretty much. The main thing there was just the establishing of the enclosure itself. Yeah. As soon as they moved in, within the first week, they'd started to construct the dam themselves. They started to change the site, and I think now there's a series of around 8 different dams across the site. So really, they did it. They shaped it. It was all them basically.
And are there any? So we've spoke a lot about all of the positives that are coming from having beavers in the UK and having them re-established at Woodland Valley Farm. Are there any negatives to having beavers reintroduced? So I know that at Woodland Valley Farm it's going great. Cornwall's quite lucky to not be flat, so there's no risk of flooding from beaver kind of wetlands. Yeah. But is there a risk of that other places in the UK? Yeah,
definitely. And this is why it's taken quite a long time to get to the stage where you can reintroduce beavers into the wild, because we've talked a lot about their damming activities. Yeah. And whilst that is amazing, some people, if you put a dam in the wrong place, it could have impacts that you don't want. So, for example, you mentioned very flat land. We're fortunate we don't really have really large kind of flat plains in Cornwall, but if a dam were to flood that, maybe landowners and farmers could be negatively impacted. So part of what we're doing in Cornwall and part of the project for the wider wild release, we're trying to understand if and where those impacts could be, and if beavers were to move in, how could we support them as well.
And you mentioned earlier as well, I just want to circle back a bit about the flooding within Laddock, which is just downstream from Woodland Valley Farm. So has there been any evidence of kind of a decrease in the water flow going down towards Laddock?
Yeah, so I think there has been. University of Exeter, I know, have done some hydrology mapping at the site. So they've modelled the flow coming into the site and leaving the site during different rainfall events, and they've seen actually that leaving the site after the beavers are there, that has significantly decreased the peak. Wow. Yeah, so which means that there's the water's being slowed down a lot, and that's going to help downstream at Laddock.
And that's impressive because it's such a small site compared to the actual water that'll be feeding into the river going towards Laddock, I assume. So if you think about the re-establishment of beavers elsewhere, how much water that would reduce for flood risks.
Yeah, exactly.
It's insane.
Exactly, yeah.
So Lauren, we've moved to a different part of your Helmantor Nature Reserve site now. We've got lovely Helmantor in the background of the shot. Yeah. And we've just talked about Woodland Valley Farm and re-establishing the beavers within there. We're now at a site where we'll talk about beaver bombing in a little second, but what is happening within this nature reserve site right now that stems from all the re-establishment of the beavers right down to maybe other nature that you're helping here?
Yeah, so this is Helmantor and Cornwall Wildlife Trust. We own an area of around 700 acres around this site. So it's a big area, and as part of that we're doing a big rewilding project. Amazing. So the beavers come into that, but there's also other things that we do. So you've got loads of different types of habitat. So when we talk about Helmantor, you've got the tor itself, which is really, really gorgeous, but you've also got the river running around the outside, and you've also got around that, you've got wet woodland, you've got wetlands, you've got bog, you've got heathland. So there's a real mixture, and Cornwall Wildlife Trust help to manage it. So we do human interventions to make sure that it stays in really good quality. But because we have we don't have the herbivores that we once had roaming the UK, we are doing what we call rewilding. So it's helping to bring back processes that that re-establish nature's balance.
Okay.
So for us here, that involves bringing back the pigs. So we're trialling, we've got 3 pigs that we're trialling on site. So they are adding that extra layer of complexity, and they're rootling around, they're turning up mud, and that's really good for the bugs. So we've got that. We've also got a herd of longhorn cattle with their big horns, and they're helping to push over vegetation, to break it up, and to actually control the different bits of the habitat as well. So we also, as part of it, is bringing back the beavers here. So it's really important to bring them back, to add that, because they're also herbivores, so they just eat plants. So some people think they eat fish, which is actually a big common misconception.
Okay.
But they eat, they eat leaves, woody material as well. They'll graze on the bark. So having that herbivore in the system as well is really important. We know the site is just amazing for them. It's got amazing habitat, so we've got loads of vegetation for them. We've got good waterways for them to live in as well. So there's lots of different things going on at the same time here, and beavers are just one of them.
Yeah, and they're all kind of connecting together with one great aim, aren't they? And
exactly.
Bringing in those pigs and those cows, and then you said about trying to re-establish beavers within the site. And you had mentioned earlier to me that you wanted to have kind of the Helmentor Nature Reserve as one of the sites for re-establishing beavers. But is it true that one day there was just beavers turning up on the site? You were beaver bombed effectively. What does that mean?
Yeah. So because we're still waiting on the government to allow us to do wild releases, there have been wild populations turning up, and it might be, our source is unknown, but it might be people getting frustrated with the pace that the reintroductions are happening, so kind of taking it into their own hands. So yeah, we use the term beaver bombing, and essentially the most likely cause of beavers arriving on site, because we know there are a pair of beavers here now, so they turned up at the end of February.
Wow.
And there's no enclosures in the same catchment, so it's very unlikely that it's an escapee, and we do think it's probably this unauthorised release, essentially. So it was a shock to us to actually, we've been working over the last year to prepare and to speak to all the locals, to get data, to understand the impacts they could have. So when we got an email from a local saying, this is weird grazing activity, and it was a very stereotypical beaver chewed stick, felled trees, and we said, look, this isn't deer, this is someone's put beavers have appeared. So it's not happened in the way that we want it to, but we know that the site is perfect for them. We know, and currently we have been monitoring them, and we know that they are still on site. So yeah.
And we have seen, when we were walking to this location, we did see signs of them having little nibbles on the bark, so it is evident that they're still around.
Exactly, yeah.
And what is then, so people that are kind of beaver bombing and popping beavers in locations that are suitable for them but not necessarily doing it legally, what negative kind of effects can that have on projects where you're trying to get places ready for them and do it the right way? Yeah,
exactly. So yeah, as in my role the past year, we've focused on getting everything ready, and like you said, we want to do it in the right way. So it's really about engaging with the community, and we want to have big public consultation events to make sure it's done in the right way. So when they've just appeared, it's not the way we wanted to do it, essentially. And we would have gone through a more rigorous process, basically. So we are going to eventually probably trap and test the beavers, just to check for genetics and disease as well, and that will give us more confidence. But yeah, it has added kind of another layer of complexity into our project.
And has there been kind of anything that you've had to change or adapt within the site now that the beavers have appeared? So is there anything that you've had to protect from them? Yeah,
so monitoring the beavers. So we've had to learn quite quickly how to do that. This time of year is really difficult because there's so much vegetation everywhere. But we have got out camera traps, and we've been monitoring their movement. And then also we've learned a lot about beaver management as well. So we've talked about the benefits, but like you said, if they put a dam in the wrong place, or they do fell trees, so if there are maybe trees that are sentimental to people or that are really of significant value. So we just walked past one on the site, probably the biggest tree on the site, that they started to take the bark off. So to protect that tree, because it supports so much other wildlife, we decided to fence it. So very easy solution. You basically can put a wire mesh fence around it, and it just protects it.
Wow.
Yeah, so we felt for that one tree, they couldn't have that one.
They can have any other tree.
any other thing else.
So then, what other challenges within the Beaver project have you come against? I know that you mentioned a lot around kind of the licenses and political wise. Is that something that you're hoping will change quite soon, or is that going to be another kind of long slog, do you think?
We are hoping, we'd hoped to already hear by now. So the government over the past few years were putting in steps that looked like they were gearing up for wild release. And Natural England, which is a government department overseeing it, they've put in place training, and the legislation's there, but we're waiting to hear from the Environment Minister at the minute to actually give the go ahead. So we are hoping to hear change.
I know that you were mentioning within Cornwall there's chance for there to be a lot more MPs within the area, so hopefully there can be a bigger stance around the importance of re-establishing beavers and kind of getting that pushed through more in the government now with this change coming in. And is there any way that the listeners in any place in the UK can help lobby for change or write to their MPs, maybe helping the beavers?
Definitely. So writing to the MPs, definitely a great way to show that people are interested. It's something that people really care about. So we have an open letter that we're asking people to sign to support demanding change and support nature-based policies. But specifically writing in about beaver reintroduction as well is a good step. We also get people going out and supporting local beaver enclosures that do beaver walks, and learning about them and sharing that information and just generally engaging with it is also an amazing thing to do.
Yeah,
and
of course. So listen, I could talk about beavers and this wonderful project and site all day, but before we close up, I just want to ask you kind of a few more questions around beavers. So what is one of the proudest things that you've accomplished in your time with the Beaver Project?
Ooh, good question.
Too many to choose.
No, I think the proudest thing is going out and speaking to people, maybe who have preconceived ideas about beavers and are maybe a bit worried about them, and actually working with local communities to increase that understanding. To really show the positive impacts beavers could have. I think that's a good part of the job. And then
how can the listeners help support the project, not just in Cornwall, but maybe even just helping to re-establish them throughout the whole of the UK?
Yeah, so the project as well, so we've got our Helmand Tory wilding appeal, so you can donate to schemes that through Cornwall Wildlife Trust, or I'm sure there's other schemes across the UK as well. And there's also there's lots going on. There's a really great organisation called the Beaver Trust as well, which really advocate for beaver reintroduction, and there's loads of stuff on their website about how you can get involved.
Great. And then just before we go, Lauren, what is your favourite beaver fact?
Oh, okay, if I have to pick one, I think for me, so beavers, we've discussed, they are herbivores, so they just eat vegetation. And that means they also eat wood, or they fell the trees to eat the bark. And to do that, they need really strong teeth. So their teeth are, because they're classed as a rodent, they constantly grow, but that makes them very good, but they actually are reinforced on the front they've got iron. So they are, which makes them really strong, but it also makes them red in colour. So beavers' teeth are red. Yeah, if you ever get up close to the beaver.
You see a coloured tooth. That's so cool. Thank you so much, Lauren. It's been really, really good to learn all about beavers and see your wonderful site at Helmand.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you to all of our listeners. You can find out news about our podcast on our Instagram or TikTok handles, which is at Animal Friends Insurance, or on our Facebook page at Animal Friends Pet Insurance.